So now we're going to look at some specific elements of formal vocabulary. And these are the most common informalities that I find related specifically to vocabulary as opposed to grammatical issues. And the first of these, and I think probably the most important of these, is to avoid using generic verbs such as get, such as the verb to be, to have, and the kind of phrasal verbs as well, where you're two-part verbs that use one of those as a part of them. You're looking really for the most specific verb you can find, and we tend to use these generic verbs because we can't think of the more precise one. So be as specific as possible. A couple of examples. The related work we found was usually by others working on a particular application. This I actually found in an actual published and highly cited paper. But working on, do we work on a particular application, or is there a more precise verb we can use? I think we develop applications, and certainly from the context, that was more formal. Another example. Recent advances in deep learning have made it possible to get high-level features from raw sensory data. Of course, we understand, but is there a better verb? There is, to extract high-level features from raw sensory data. And in this case, the article itself had extract. So be precise. Second one, avoid cliches and idioms. Cliches are phrases that people use all the time. Here's an example. Only time will tell whether React, Angular, or Vue will be the front-end framework of choice in the coming years. This is not only bad writing in the academic context, but also in any other context. I mean, we should avoid cliche to write clearly. What do we mean, though? Only time will tell. It's difficult to predict, maybe, which of React, Angular, or Vue will be the dominant front-end framework in the near future. I don't know if it is. Perhaps not Angular, at least. Idiom. So here we have an example of an idiom, a bunch of words that mean something different to what they appear to mean, and that are informal. Unless Apple gets its act together, it will not be able to challenge Google for the lead in AI. What do we mean when we say gets its act together? Well, innovates more quickly. So we're being more precise. We're trying to unpack what's going on there. The mind will come up with these cliches and idioms. I mean, literally a cliche is something that your mind is trained to come up with. But we have to think again. What do I mean precisely? Okay, third, avoiding simplistic vocabulary. So sometimes we use words like big, good. They're a bit banal, they're a bit simple, and they just don't really fit in the academic context. Here's an example of a less terrible example, but one that needs to be fixed anyway. Both of these methods incorporate lots of prior knowledge about the visual problem. What could we say instead of lots of? Both of these methods incorporate significant prior knowledge about the visual problem. And you could probably come up with some other examples there as well. Last but not least, avoid slang or jargon. Slang is a word that is unofficial. Jargon can be of two kinds. So sometimes, in some contexts, we use it to just mean vocabulary from a specific field. But in some contexts, we mean it to mean vocabulary that people within a field use unofficially together. IT is full of jargon. Here's an example of jargon. All necessary data is accessible through their API. Okay, so it's technical. Everyone in the field would understand it, but people who don't know what an API is would not understand it. So we want to write it out in full. All necessary data is accessible through their application programming interface. We did discuss today in class, if you were there, whether this is necessary. It's possible that API is better known than application programming interface. I tend to think that application programming interface is at least somewhat descriptive, whereas API, to somebody who's never encountered an API, would be completely and just impossible to guess what it means. Here's another example of jargon. Though the functionality was sound, the UX was a disaster. So we know that UX is short. I mean, it's short for user experience. So we need to say the user experience was a disaster. Again, there's an argument to be made that UX is so commonly known, but I think in this case it's clearer than the API case that user experience is clear to everybody, whereas UX, it is not only a poor acronym because it should be UE, but it's not clear to people outside of that field. Okay, so these are the 4 vocabulary informalities that you should try to avoid.